Hello again, students. This video is meant to cover the material in the second half of Module 2. If you look, you could roughly divide it up into two parts. So it would be installation, what all is involved with installing a distribution of Linux on a machine, which we did in one video with Fedora 28 onto VirtualBox. And that's what's running right now here. What you see is a window from Windows 10 showing Brightspace and the slides for Chapter 2 or Module 2, whatever you want to call it. And then in the background is the VirtualBox running Fedora 28. So I'm just going to kind of show you some of these things here that are in the slides, and also whatever comes to mind. It might cover material in the future. That's okay. It's not bad to get double coverage. It comes to mind that I mentioned sudoers last time. What I said may or may not have been somewhat accurate, but we'll cover sudoers in the future if anybody made a note about that. So first thing to talk about is what a shell terminal, etc. is. So the first thing I'm really going to show you out of these is the terminals. You'll notice that TTY is the combination of letters often used in association with this, and that's because in the olden days you had these electronic network, over wire, like telegraph wires, keyboards that you could type on, teletype terminals. So the TTY comes from teletype. And there's a lot of things like that. You'll see that you got these old-fashioned notions of like electromechanical type devices that are sort of emulated in software, and you keep the old name. So a terminal, this next slide is a good representation of what it means for there to be a terminal. And if you want to think about it, the kernel, again, just to remind you, the kernel is that part of the operating system that's always resident in memory, like operating, doing the work. So you can kind of think of this as like the old-fashioned days where you had a mainframe computer, and the mainframe computer would be, wires would be coming out of the mainframe and going to what were called dumb terminals back then. If you think about war games, that wasn't a dumb terminal, but it was that kind of screen, right? Just all text, green or amber text. The user would come up to the dumb terminal, log in, and then interact with the mainframe, and the mainframe could handle several users at once, one for each terminal. So that's sort of replicated in a Linux desktop environment by having these terminals, and we'll talk more about what shell is here in a moment. But the way you access these in Fedora is the key combination Control-Alt and then a function key. So for instance, if I do Control-Alt F4, that brings me up a terminal. And this one already has a login. Let me log out. You should see a login screen if you haven't already logged into it. So you can type in your username and password. This might fail because, yeah, that's fine. And then you can type commands into the shell. So the thing that you see right now, this is the shell. A shell is a program that runs on a terminal or a pseudo terminal. Maybe we'll talk more about what that means in a second. It will prompt you for commands. You type in the commands if you know them, and it will interpret those commands and execute them, hopefully. Anyway, that's what a shell is. It's a command line shell, sometimes the full name of it. In Fedora, and I think most common distros, I think this is true in Debian as well, if I'm not mistaken. The most common shell that you'll encounter is the Bourne Again shell. So if you look in the chapter, it gives you some tips about command line, environment variables and things like that. Here's one, $shell in all caps. If you type that, it will echo means, hey, print out what I'm about to type. And then if you put a variable there, it prints out the value of that variable. In this case, what's stored into Linux when everything boots up, it'll pick a shell for you. There's scripts and configuration files that do that. And Bourne Again shell is the one that's used by default, apparently, in Fedora. And it's a common shell. It comes from the Bourne shell. So let me type that. Think Bourne identity, not Bourne like have, you know. I said again, but starting as an infant, not that kind. It's Bourne with a U and an E. So that was like one of the original very popular shells. Shells are in a way, they are a computer programming language. They have variables and commands you can use to do programmatic things with. But at the simplest level, it provides a command prompt for users to type commands, like the one I just typed, which was echo with the argument $shell, and that was interpreted as print out what the value of that variable, which $sign means this is going to be a variable. The shell variable is. Just to top out the rest of the name, is the Bourne again shell. It's just its basis is the Bourne, so it's in that language, in that dialect of shell programming languages, but it has more features than the old just Bourne shell, which was SH. You'll notice sometimes the prompts for these shells will be like their name, so bash or shell. More often these days it'll have something like what it's got here. It's got the username and where you're at, and maybe what directory you're in. So ls, by the way, that's the list of contents of the directory. The shell took that command ls and said, oh, he wants a directory listing, so that's what I want to provide. And this is a shell configuration specific thing. It doesn't have to be this way, but in this particular configuration of the Bourne again shell, the bash shell, you can just call it bash. Directories are indicated in blue. In other ones, it might be that the name of the directory will be followed by a slash to show this a directory. You won't have color coding. That's all kind of a configuration level thing. So that's not necessarily just even Bourne again shell. That's just the configuration for this particular use of it that was set up by whoever did Fedora. I don't have anything to show you here. Actually, I could show what's directory listings underneath that, but clear, by the way, will clear your screen. I have a habit of doing that often. I think I'm lost where I was. Oh yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, so you'll notice it'll say, like in this case, when I go to a subdirectory by typing cd, which means change directory. What do I want to change the directory to? I want to go up one directory, which is 2 dots, and then I want to go back down to desktop. And you'll notice that it shows in the prompt what current directory I'm in. You can also find out which current directory you're in by doing present working directory, PDW, and that shows you a path, an absolute path from the root through the subdirectory home to the subdirectory Nicholso, which is that's the user am. There might be another user in home. That would be their home area. Since we're here, we'll finish the terminal lecture in a second, but since we're doing these things, another shell variable you'll have, environment variable, is tilde. You can type cd tilde and that will take you to your home directory. It's a shortcut for doing that. So if you want to teleport back home, you just type cd space tilde. Usually most shells are configured for this to do it though. You can just type cd enter and it takes you to the same thing that tilde does. Every now and then though, you want to go directly to a certain directory from anywhere in the file system, and you could do tilde slash and then from there. One other tip I'll tell you right now, since we're doing this, get used to using tab all the time. I can't say it so much now because I'm not in class with you, but one of the most frustrating things for me is to see students mistype over and over incorrect, and when all they need to do is type like a couple of letters and hit tab and it auto completes for you. This is also a shell. The shell program is looking for the tab to happen, and when it does, when the user types tab, it will immediately search for some possibilities to autocomplete and give you, like in this case, if you type cd, let me do it again. If I type cd, I'm at my home directory, right? There's these possible directories that I could cd to. If I type cd-do, that's not enough. So if you press it a couple times, it's like, okay, these are the two you can do. And if you type W now, That's the only one. Notice also the slash. When you type ls, it does blue. Well, you have to have some subdirectories to see. When you do ls by itself, it does blue in this particular shell set configuration. But you notice that when I do cd, it indicates that it's a directory by putting a slash on the end. That's not part of the name. That's just a little symbol that means, hey, this is a directory. Okay, getting back to the terminal lesson. So this was, if you type actually right now, tty, that's a command that's interpreted by the shell to tell you which terminal you're in. I'm teletype terminal 4. That's what tty4 is. Notice that it's /dev/tty4. This is a thing in Unix and Linux, and it's probably talked about later in your material. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm going to talk about it and introduce it now. There are many things in the Linux environment that are abstracted as a file. And so in this case, and the reason why is because files can be written to and read from. And what do you do with data in a computer? You read it and you write it, right? So your keyboard, for instance, I think it's actually a TTY. It's one of the TTY's devices. So dev stands for device. And what, if you look, ls/dev, there are a bunch of devices here, a bunch of TTYs, teletype terminals. There's some for your hard drive. In this case, it'd be the SD, which used to stand for SCSI drive. We'll talk more about SCSI later. Sometimes your distribution will have HD for a device for hard drive. I don't see it here. That's more of the ATA type. IDE also is another name for that. Null is a file that you can write to that basically goes into nothing. It's we'll talk more about dev null later. You'll see dev null though mentioned by like hackers as sort of like a tongue-in-cheek thing a lot. Redirect the output that I'm hearing from you to dev null, that kind of silly nerd joke. That was a side thing. There's a lot of tangents in this that I should try to avoid going into, but very many things, mouse, keyboard, hard drive, network card, are abstracted as files that you read and write to. That's the way Linux looks at it. If you think about it that way, then there are many programs and stuff you can write. You can just pretend you're writing to a file and you don't have to worry about the specifics as long as the device manager, device driver software, and the device itself knows how to handle bytes coming to it, right? If you want to send some bytes out to the world through your network card, you just write bytes to the network card file and it takes those bytes and then goes, out to the, goes out into the world. So getting back to the terminals, again, it's Control Alt and then a function key. It looks like F1 is where I think F1 is the one you're actually logged in. F2 seems to take, both of these seem to be the same thing, or maybe it's two different graphical windows. I'm not sure. Fedora, I'm not a Fedora expert. F3, that's F4, F5, F6, F7. I've been told there are only 7 terminals for like logging into type terminals in Linux. That we need to double check that number and make sure we're right. That might be maybe true, maybe not true kind of thing. I'm going to pause right here and create a new user so I can show you a little bit more about what terminals do. Okay, I'm back. Created the user so I can demonstrate a little bit more about these terminals. The way I did that, by the way, I'm presently the root user. Root is your administrator in the Windows terms. So I have, as root, I have all the privileges. And the thing is that Nicholso also has a lot of privileges. You just have to use sudo to do them. Anyway, user adds the command, and then you can set the password for a user using passwd. So that's what I did. I created a new user and created a password for her. So that's Sally. I'm going to use Control D to log out of root. Control D is means end of file. I think it's the end of file character. Anyway, what it does is it logs you out of things often. So Control D. You can type exit as well, apparently. That brings back to Nicholso. If you want to see the history, I had to remind myself how to do all this. Sudo su. is how I got to super user. If you type sudo su and then type your password, then it will take you to the root prompt that I was at, so I could create a new user. So what did that do for me? Not that's Welsh clear, not English clear. If I go to another terminal now, say, and by the way you type this on Fedora, I've noticed, is you have to do Control-Alt-F something, one of the function keys. You got to do it every time, though. You can't just hold it down and like switch between the function keys. You have to retype Control-Alt, almost like in that order, separated in time. So I'll do Control-Alt-F4, for instance, and it would take me to this terminal. Let me log out. Also, I did Control-D there. Now when I type Sally and the password that I gave for Sally, I can log in as user Sally. And if I type who, you can see that on TTY4 we've got Sally, and that Nicholso is on Xterm. I think it's Xterm1 is what that :1 means, because it's the graphical interface, and likewise with Sally, she's on 2. If I do Control-Alt-F1, you can see that Sally was here. I logged her out, but we'll log her back in. She's on, well, let's do it this way. So we're logging in Sally on that F1 terminal, and that :1's an X window server thing, client server, whichever. Looks like there was some setup too for Sally that I'm not going to finish. If I do Control-Alt-F2, that's the one I've been working in. So that's a little bit of what about different terminals. You might use them quite a bit in this class and need to know from the exam. In my experience, I will occasionally change to a different terminal when I'm just working in Linux, especially back when I was in school and doing some weird things. So maybe I might change terminals for that. But for the most part, I just stay in whatever one that comes up when I log in and go into the graphical thing. Now, I think I talked about this already. Probably should cut this video up into twice. I'm going to try to stay under 20 minutes by just doing this, and then I'll maybe make another video with some more stuff. But this terminal that I'm in, again, this is one word for more than one thing. This is called a pseudo terminal. It's an application that replicates the experience of talking with a terminal to your computer. The thing that's different about this is like you can have as many as you want, and it's a terminal within a terminal in a way. Right, so I need to make a shortcut for this too, because I use terminals all the time. It did it not give me another copy of it? Can I open another one this way? Usually this is new. It's been a while since I used terminals, so file, new tab. I guess you could do new tab. That would be another terminal with a different tab, and there should be a way to let's see. That's a quick way to do a new terminal. I'd have to check and see because I haven't been using this GUI in a while. But anyway, you can make more than one pseudo terminal inside of your terminal to talk to your community. You will often do it. I'll have several different terminals like laid out and working in between them. And if you type TTY right here, it'll tell you that it's a pseudo terminal. I think sure what the S stands for, but it's pseudo terminal 2 in this case. It's that device abstraction that I was talking about before. If you type TTY here, it's pseudo terminal 1, I guess. This is probably 0 because it was the first one. 0's first in IT. If you don't know this already, you've had some other classes already, so you probably do. I think that's enough for now. And again, this is a pseudo terminal. It's replicating the experience of the actual terminals, which are also in themselves are replications of the dumb terminals that talked to mainframes back in the day. And then those in turn are sort of like the inheritors of the original teletype terminals. So that's kind of how the relation of things go. I think I'll make one more video, hopefully a little short. I hope it'll be a little shorter, about just some common commands and orienting yourself as a user in Linux, so you'll have a base to go from. But this was a lecture point, so I wanted to go over what terminals are. Didn't mean to make such a big deal out of it, but I hope it was clear. Maybe watch this video a couple times, or you can just read the material on the slides. I do this. I like to give the video so people have another way of digesting or receiving the information if it helps. And sometimes too, like just hearing me say what's going on, it'll confirm that you were thinking right about it. I think that's the biggest use of it. Okay, 20 minutes and